Hello, Bravs. We return with Shakespeare's Sweet Art. Not even sure where we're at. Since I have been reading for a week, we shall get back to this. Chapter 13, just like with the other book. Who's calling me? Scam likely. Go away. Go away. Thank you. Chapter 13. Does that say Romeus? Romeus and Juliet. Everything was in confusion when I entered the theater. Rushes were being strewed upon the stage, and the hangings for a tragedy were going up. I saw actors busy here, there, and everywhere, and in the midst of all stood Will, directing, commanding, suggesting. In a dark corner of the stage, loud Sir John, interjecting occasional remarks which caused the actors to roar with laughter. Count William was nowhere to be seen. Will saw me at the instant I entered and hailed me with an air of relief. "At last, Cesario," he cried, "thou hast tarried long. Come hither, boy, and quickly, for we await thy presence. There's need that we should work briskly, for her Majesty, God save her, has just sent word that she wishes to have this play performed at the palace within a fortnight." "Thou wilt be in royal company, then, Will," observed Sir John, pretending to wipe his eyes. "Thou'lt have no place in thy heart for poor old John. Nay, thou'lt not let him forget thee so long as he hath money in his purse," cried Marlowe, giving the fat man a boisterous slap on the shoulder. Sir John shook under the blow, but he made no attempt to retaliate. He only began to rub the place with an air of offended dignity. Meanwhile, I had come close to Will. "Hast the miniature?" he said to me in a quick, anxious undertone. "Aye," I answered, beginning to reach under my doublet for the toy. I had not the least desire to retain it for my own, despite the Countess's words. "'Tis well, keep it safe," said Will, staying my movement with a quick gesture. "Not here and now. The Count hath gone hence. Moreover, we shall be observed. Tomorrow after the play will serve. Take those lips away, that so sweetly were forsworn, and those eyes, the break of day, lights that do mislead the morn." A rich voice began to carol behind us. Will startled and turned with an exclamation of annoyance. I also looked around to see who sang. Behold, 'twas no other than Sir John, who sat there, his eyes half closed, breathing forth the pathetic words in a voice infinitely rich and sorrowful. One wondered how so rare a thing could be enclosed in so cumbrous a casket. "Enough," said Will imperatively. "No more, Jack. That song belongs not to Romeus and Juliet." Sir John paused obediently, but went on humming the air in a kind of undertone. His choice had been accidental, no doubt, but the words he had sung sounded like the voice of fate. Will had been visibly annoyed by them. Was conscience troubling him? I went sorrowfully to my place, the wonder tormenting me. The rehearsal began. Master Johnson was Capulet, Marlowe did Tybalt, and Burbage Mercutio. The latter took the part of Harrow, as a rule, but as this was Will's own play, he himself was to act Romeus. How bittersweet this last arrangement made the part of Juliet to me. Sometimes it seemed as if I were reliving my own love story. Had it not also begun in rapture and ended in despair? Again, the contrast between Will's falsehood and the faith of Romeus would cut me to the heart so deep that I found my double part passing difficult to play. Pale and quiet, I stood on my balcony the afternoon and went through the wooing scene. The miniature lay upon my heart and seemed to burn my bosom. How careful Will had been that even the semblance of the Countess should not be exposed to the player's idle gaze, while I stood here before them all for them to jest over and criticize as they would. 'Twas true he knew me not, but had it not been for his falsehood, I had not been there at all. That day's long and difficult rehearsal was the final one. The following afternoon occurred the first public performance, in preparation for the great one at the palace. I slept with the miniature under my pillow that night, and methought it gave me uneasy dreams. The next day I reached the Globe at the appointed time. It was still early, but there was already a great crowd about the theater, swearing, singing, jostling one another. They awaited the opening of the doors. The red sign announcing the performance of a tragedy was hung without the building. And as I read it mechanically, I thought of how much pleasure it would have given me in my own person to witness my husband's triumph. As it was, I pushed further thought away and entered. I found Will pacing up and down the stage. Sir John was at his elbow, following and imitating him, so far as his unwieldy frame would permit. "Ha, fellow," cried the latter, importantly, as he saw me. "Why hast tarried so long? Thou'st worried our dear Will." "I'm not subject to your reproof, Sara," I answered tartly, for the speech angered me. Will's brow had cleared as I came in. The lad is right, Sir John," he said somewhat imperiously. "He is here in time, and 'tis enough. Thou art not his monitor." Sir John's tone changed instantly. "Nay, I meant not to be hard on the boy," he said, smiling at me unctuously. "So thou art satisfied, Will. I am also." Had he not come, remember, he paused impressively, remember, I offered to take his place. This remark was made with much gravity, and the speaker's sighs rendered the idea of his performing Juliet irresistibly ludicrous. "Thou," said Will, his face relaxing into a laugh. "Nay, thou shouldst rather play the nurse. A truce to thy folly, Sir John, and get thee to thy place. Hark! The doors are opening." We heard the cannon fired without, announcing the opening of the play, and fled to get ready. A little while later I peeped out between the curtains to get a glance at the audience. There was a full house. The pit was crowded with commoners who had made up the unruly mob without. The air resounded with their jests and oaths and snatches of song, while they waited for thy play to begin. In the balcony beyond sat the gentry, and on each side of the stage were chairs, as yet vacant, which the nobles would occupy later. The last were usually tardy in their arrival, since they felt more secure of their places than did the masses. Standing in a corner of the pit, I saw Robin Green, looking gloomily about, and greatly to my surprise, stout Sir John was close behind him. Even as I looked, Robin turned, and the two began to talk together confidentially, with occasional glances towards the stage. So utterly surprised was I that I scarce knew what to do. Surely this amiable converse between Will's sworn enemy and one who accepted his favors and professed to be his friend boded no good to Will himself. For an instant I hesitated as to what course to follow. Then the power to decide was taken from me. Will, dressed in black and wearing a cloak, came forward to speak the prologue, and I left the stage precipitately. I had already donned my feminine attire and was struck with a sudden fear lest he should recognize me in these more familiar garments, but he did not. He had seen me only in peasant garb, not in the bravery of Juliet's silks and satins. Moreover, my dyed locks and stained face still stood me in good stead. He looked at me approvingly, and remarked that the gown became me well. Then, as I left the stage, I heard his clear voice begin. Two households, both alike in dignity. The opening scene followed amid much applause, and at length it was time for my first appearance. How natural and delightful it seemed to be a maid once more. Now that the time had come, I quite enjoyed my part. Lightly I ran on the stage and answered to the call of Lady Capulet and the nurse, and cried blithely, "Madam, I am here. What is your will?" As I was in the midst of this scene, Count William entered quietly and took his seat at the right of the stage. He caught my eye presently, and gave me a kindly nod and smile. As for me, I flushed guiltily for an instant. I could not help wondering what he and Will would have said had they overheard the conversation between the Countess and myself the day before. As for that kiss at parting, I'll look to like if looking liking move. I'll look to like if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eyes than your consent gives strength to make it fly. I came back with a start to the scene about me as my own voice uttered the words. There were sounds of unmistakable approval from the audience as Juliet's interview with her mother ended, and the nobles came crowding around Will and me, congratulating him on his new actor. Will thanked them for us both and uttered a few words of commendation of his own account, which were at once pleasing and distressing to me. These congratulations ended. The play progressed a little further, and then came my first trying ordeal, the ballroom scene where Romeo and Juliet meet. For some minutes I was on the stage, scarce knowing what was going on. Then I was brought back with a sudden rush of feeling to the play and to my part. Will entered as Romeus with Burbage as Mercutio and some lesser actor as Benvolio. An instant later his melodious voice, who knew so well as I its music and its charm, broke across the ordinary accents of the rest. What lady's that, which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight? And then came those words which had been spoken to me alone, one happy May morn. Dear God, how many years ago! Her beauty hangs upon the cheek of night like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear, beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear. I swayed an instant where I stood. Gone was the restless pit with its noisy pushing crowd. Gone the roofless theater with the blue sky fair above. Gone was the hall of the Capulets and the Italian revelers. Only Will and I remained, and he stood in a sweet-smelling country lane on a fair English May day, while I leaned from a vine-framed window above, and love undying, strong as death, entered my poor heart. Kit Marlowe's fiery tumult interrupted my thought and restored my sense of things present. During the rapid dialogue that followed, this is never going to end, my wits came slowly back to me. When Will drew near, at last I was comparatively calm. Yet when I saw his eyes looking into mine with the old, impassioned light, when I heard his voice pregnant with love and reverence, I nearly lost my self-control once more. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this, my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth the rough touch with a tender kiss. Ah, and if he knew whose lips had just touched mine, hurriedly, mechanically, I gave Juliet's reply, and I fear that all her light speeches were delivered somewhat heavily. My relief was great when the brief dialogue ended, and I was able to leave Will's side. Ah, what a lover, what a traitor, cried my heart. Little wonder he could act passion so well. He had had good practice, and all my pent-up sorrow and anguish found vent in the words I cried to the nurse. Go ask his name, if he be married. My grave is like to prove my wedding bed. If this scene were difficult, how much more was Juliet's wooing on the balcony? Alack, could I ever play this part again, with its numberless suggestions of the dear had been? Natheless, once undertaken, it must be gone through with somehow. And so from Juliet's balcony was sighed forth that day Anne Hathaway's soul. That scene which I had helped to make, what sorrow it brought me now. In the old happy days, Will had told me that the first idea of his Juliet was drawing upon him when he met me, and that afterwards he wrote as if inspired. Mine, then, were Juliet's sudden love and heavenly wooing. Mine, her hasty marriage, and mine too, when my task was ended, would be, I hoped, her tragic death. But Romeus would not lie beside her then. At length the scene ended, leaving me faint and wavering with the effort it had cost me. What mockery were the words that Will's voice sent after me as I staggered from my balcony. Sleep dwell on thine eyes, peace on thy breast. Would I were sleep and peace so sweet to rest. Thou art doing well, Cesario, cried Johnson's kindly voice as I left the stage. He came to me and held out his hand. If thou dost go on as thou hast begun, thy fortune's made. Alack, how little he knew what would make my fortune. A man's smile, a man's love. I tried to thank him somewhat warily. Burbage looked at me compassionately. Thou art tired, lad, he said. 'Twill be some time before thou wilt appear again, so rest thee. I add to my congratulations to Ben's. I shall ask Will to lend thee to me when he finishes the play, of which he talks now. A new version of the story of Prince Hamlet. There's a mad, lovelorn girl in it, and that thou wouldst do well, I know. I answered, laughing somewhat hysterically. I thank thee, Master Burbage. Thou art right. Such a part as that, a mad, lovelorn girl, I love right well to play. And with that I left them, for I felt that if I stayed a moment longer, the audience would not wait for Hamlet to see a mad, love-lorn girl rush upon the stage. The play went on. Mercutio was done with fine effect by Burbage, and the brilliant, witty part afterwards became a favorite with the London people. Droll Will Kemp made the nurse utterly humorous, and my scenes with him were a delight, for they relieved the strain to which I was subjected while acting with Will. At length the wedding in the friar's cell was celebrated, and then suddenly the performance was brought to a standstill. Kit Marlowe had disappeared. During the alarmed turmoil that followed while they searched for him, I went once more to the curtains and glanced out at the audience. In the agitations of the play, I had forgotten about the singular conjunction of Sir John and Robin Greene in the audience. As I looked out at the pit, again, however, I remembered it, and my eye sought them once more. Robin Greene had come close to the stage and was standing there with an expectant look on his petulant face. Sir John had disappeared. Scarce had I time to wonder at his absence when my attention was again withdrawn from the audience. Kemp entered, sputtering and angry, bringing with him Marlowe, much the worse for liquor. There he sat. He began in a furious tone, so in contrast with his costume as the nurse, that it was very ludicrous. There he sat, drinking with Jack Falstaff. As if there were no play in progress, Jack was telling his best stories, and Kit was pouring wine down his throat and applauding. "Thou renegade, what hast thou to say for thyself?" But Marlowe had turned sulky and refused to speak. Will, much relieved at sight of him, said a few pacific words. The hell are pacific words? And after some experiments to see whether Marlowe were sufficiently sober to go through the scene, the play went on. It had not continued long, however, before Marlowe's sorry plight was discovered by the nobles, and they burst into derisive laughter and satirical jibes, which were taken up in rougher fashion by the pit. This perhaps sobered Marlowe, who was accustomed to being a favorite. At any rate, the wavering motion left his legs, and in the ensuing duel with Mercutio he fought magnificently. Finally, Burbage dropped in his supposed death agony, and Marlowe made his exit. A few moments later, in response to Romeo's taunt, he re-entered, and the second duel began. I was watching from the side, where I could see at once both the scene and the spectators. It seemed to me the mock duel was lasting longer than it should. Involuntarily, I turned and looked at the audience. Robin Greene was close to the stage now. His neck was craned forward, and upon his face was an expression of eager, delighted malice. I heard murmurs among the nobles. I looked again at the combat on the stage. The truth came to me with overwhelming conviction. 'Twas no play duel being fought there, and the mimic tragedy was like to prove a fatal one, prove a real one. I could not move. I could not cry out. I stood in agony, my eyes fixed upon the flashing swords. An instant later, that which I looked came. I stood in agony, my eyes fixed upon the flashing swords. An instant later, that which I looked for came. Will fell with a half-suppressed groan, the blood streaming. Marlowe threw away his rapier and stood in a grandiloquent attitude, a look of drunken triumph on his face. The nobles on the stage arose, horrified. The actors crowded about Will's prostrate figure. The pit, not realizing yet that the play was otherwise than as written, applauded frantically. As for me, limbs and tongue suddenly seemed loosened. With a scream, I ran forward, and pushing all the rest aside, knelt beside Will, striving to stanch the blood in whose plenteous stream his life seemed flowing forth. That will end chapter 14, or 13. Goodbye. Goodbye.